You can't be a revolutionary country. You can't have revolutionary slogans so long as you are implementing neoliberal and liberal and Western policies, economic policies. You can't be revolutionary so long as you are following the instructions of the World Bank or the IMF. And this is one of the criticisms that has always been, and I can claim in recent years, the voices that are making these criticisms are louder than before. The problem is that they don't want to accept that the animosity which the United States has with Iran doesn't have anything to this government or that government. It has some sort of animosity with an entity called Iran, which is a mosaic of ethnicities and cultures and its geopolitical, location. The era of strategic patience has come to its end, and the era of an eye for an eye maybe has started.
Hello, and welcome to Attrition. I'm your host, Ammar Kazmi, and in this show we delve into the forces of war, imperialism, and Zionism, exploring their impact on our world and what it will take to overcome them. The prospect of a US Zionist war against the Islamic Republic of Iran remains on the cards, as indirect talks between Iran and the US continue to take place in the Sultanate of Oman. But before we get into that, please make sure to like this video and to subscribe to the channel. It helps me to keep bringing you content like this. Now, this is not the first time that the Islamic Republic has engaged in negotiations with the United States, and the history isn't exactly favourable. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, also known as the Iran nuclear deal in 2015, which provided limited sanctions relief in exchange for butchering Iran's nuclear program, fell apart just 3 years later when Donald Trump's regime withdrew from the agreement and reimposed sanctions on the Islamic Republic. And last year, in 2025, while Iran was in the middle of talks with the US, the Zionist entity began a bombing campaign in Tehran, which resulted in fierce Iranian retaliation. So why is Iran negotiating with the US again? What are the internal dynamics in Iran that have led to this state of affairs, and what are the likely outcomes we will see? Well, there are few people as well placed to discuss all of this than Fereshteh Sadeghi. Fereshteh is a freelance journalist, political commentator, and analyst based in Tehran, with bylines in numerous outlets including Al Jazeera English, Al Monitor, The Cradle, and more. She holds a master's degree in sociology from the University of Tehran, and she specializes in Iranian domestic politics and wider regional security matters. And it's a great pleasure to be able to welcome her to the show today. Fereshteh, thank you very much for taking the time to join me.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for your invitation.
Fereshteh, I really am pleased to be able to have you on the program, because I think there are very few people in the Iranian political scene who are able to express in English some of the nuances and minutiae about Iranian politics as you are able to do. I want to discuss the ongoing Iran-US negotiations, but before we do that, we have to get into some of the necessary background. First, could you tell us what the history is of Iran's negotiations with the US, and who has been pushing for this? Because the leader of Iran's revolution, Ayatollah Khamenei, has continuously warned against engagement with the US, and he has repeatedly been proven right on that, I have to say. So why is the Iranian government still pursuing negotiations with the United States?
I think I'm sure that your viewers are aware of the animosity, we can say, between Iran and the United States that stems from the 1953 coup. And then it stretches to the modern time, or almost 4 or 5 decades ago until now. So to be brief, I can say Iran and Iraq between 1980 to 1988 had a war. And the United States was one of the countries that was effectively and directly helping Saddam Hussein in his war against Iran. After the war, Iran started reconstruction, and they try to grab investors or take the attention of investors. And one of the groups that they could invest in Iran were Americans. Back then, when the late President Hashemi Rafsanjani, he took power in Iran, he started modernizing the foreign policy of Iran, which was with an openness to the world. So with him, all these trends that I can say, has strangled Iran until now, started when President Khatami took power in before 2000. The reformists, the camp that we call them reformists in Iran, they were really eager to have some sort of relationship with the United States. It was at the time of Clinton, President Clinton. I mean, they were coincided with with President Clinton's presidency. So they tried to open the routes between Iran and the United States, which was filled with animosity. And then it seems that Americans, or better to say Israelis, were aware that Iranians have resumed their nuclear activities following the end of Iran-Iraq war. So the problem with the nuclear activities of Iran, or what they say Iran's push for a bomb, started from early 2000s. So I think it was in 2003 when former President Hassan Rouhani was the national security advisor on Iran. And they started a real push. And because President Khatami had, you can say, popular movement among Iranians, back then he had won with 20 million votes. So they felt that they have the power to change the course of the Islamic Republic. They say that we are tired with this so-called revolutionary rhetoric and slogans and death with the United States slogans, and we want to have a normal relationship with the world. So in 2003, they started some talks with the Europeans, 3 European countries known as E3, the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. They reached a deal which is called, among Iranians, it is called Sadabad Accords. And per those accords, Iranians started dismantling some of their nuclear activities. They stopped voluntarily enrichment. And at that level, Iranian enrichment was at very low levels, I think 3 to 5%, not more than that. In exchange for the Europeans to help Iranians not to take their case to the UN Security Council and to open channels of opportunities for the Iranians. Unfortunately, it didn't work. For 2 years, Iranians waited. The same thing that happened to the 2015 nuclear deal with Iran. And the Europeans backtracked on their commitments as usual. So by 2005, when former President Ahmadinejad reached power, the deal was, you can say, it was totally destroyed. So this trend that we call it nuclear issue and discussions over Iranian nuclear program has been continuing on and off since 2003. So it means that almost 23 years. And since 2003, Iranians are saying that we are not pursuing a bomb, and the other side doesn't accept it. Whatever the goodwill gesture Iranians show, it seems that doesn't work at all. So after June 2025's attacks, Israeli strikes on Iran, which we can say it killed the remaining nuclear scientists, whoever was left from the first generation of Iranian nuclear scientists. The same thing that happened to Iraq in 1980s. Iranians didn't want to discuss anything with the Americans anymore. And their argument was that, okay, President Trump claims that he has destroyed our nuclear facilities. And we know that they destroyed Natanz. We know that they inflicted huge losses and huge damage on Isfahan UFC facilities. So Iranians said, okay, we don't have nuclear program. You have destroyed it. So discussing what? Or what topic is left to discuss? Unfortunately, some regional Arab countries, after these recent protests, in January protests in Iran, when President Trump suddenly, out of nowhere, jumped into this field and said that I would attack Iran. So the Europeans and Arab countries found another platform to pressure Iran to come to the negotiating table. It was to the benefit of the Americans. And it seems that Iranians, because they were reluctant, they are still reluctant, and they accepted, again, to show your goodwill gesture, to show that they have nothing to hide. They are always open to diplomacy. They prefer resolving problems through diplomacy, through talks, rather than war and confrontation. But to be honest with you, it seems that here in Iran, nobody is really optimistic even about this round of talks with everybody says something. Iranians just went to Muscat, to Oman this Friday, I mean, last Friday, actually, we can say, to say that, okay, so let's see what Americans want. And now they have returned to Tehran. They don't say much details about it. They don't reveal much details about the talks. So we have to wait and see what happens in the coming weeks.
Well, I mean, Fereshteh, what I was trying to pick out there, and you sort of went into it a little bit about this so-called reformist trend in Iran that was obviously pioneered by Ali Akbar Hashemi Rafsanjani, who served as the voice, patron, and mentor of the reformist camp. And then that grew under the presidency of Mohammad Khatami and later President Hassan Rouhani. But it seems that effectively there's this unlimited goodwill on the part of the Iranians towards the United States. And that kind of goodwill, when it goes on long enough, starts to either look like naivety or sabotage. I mean, Ayatollah Khamenei has made it clear numerous times that Iran should not be following this path, and he has been met with open defiance at times. And he has said that the reason why Iran doesn't trust the Americans is because of experience. They've already shown themselves to be backstabbers and deceivers numerous times. So what do you think about this continued US engagement? I mean, is it sabotage? Is it stupidity? Is it naivety? Because it looks to be something quite sinister on the part of those people within Iran who keep pushing for collaboration with the United States in what is obviously a fruitless effort.
You can say naivety. We can say some sort of trust, everlasting trust in the United States. But through all these years, we can say late President Rafsanjani had reformist leanings. President Rouhani was there. I mean, President Khatami was totally someone who is known to be the leader of the reformist movement in Iran. Then we had President Rouhani, who was in cahoots with them. And then we have Pezeshkian, Masoud Pezeshkian, who is encircled with them. For Pezeshkian, the case is a bit different. Pezeshkian is somehow, we can say, loyal to Ayatollah Khamenei. But your loyalty is not enough when people around you, people who are surrounding you, are from the same camp, which they openly say, okay, we don't need nuclear program. Why should we have it and pay such a hefty price for it? With death, with money, with seeing strikes, Israeli-American strikes, constant animosity. And the other camp, whoever opposes them, I can't say principalists or conservatives, because they are also in cahoots with these reformists in this kind of thinking. But the problem is that they don't want to accept that the animosity which the United States has with Iran doesn't have anything to this government or that government. It has some sort of animosity with an entity called Iran, which is a mosaic of ethnicities and cultures and its geopolitical, location. So they simply say, okay, give it up. So what's wrong with it? And Ayatollah Khamenei, he's a man in his 80s. The reformists have media. They have the power to turn the tide, to turn the media tide against you. They have power. There are some, financial power, some semi-governmental companies and firms that through various privatization in various governments, they have been taken out by these entities that they have reformist leaning. So they have money, they have media, and they have all the time, they are producing some people who, you can say experts at universities and then brainwashing students at universities. So that's the way that to some extent you can resist them. This is, I think, the case of Ayatollah Khamenei. And he's always thinking about the benefit and interest of the Iranian people. He says that, look, it doesn't work. Reason, our experience. But if you insist on going and again discussing things, this is my framework, this is my red lines. Okay, if you think that you have this art of remaining in this framework and convincing the United States with your argument, okay, let's go and see how it comes. But the problem is that the United States, the other side, which is not only the United States, the European, some Arab regimes in the region, you can say the entire world are with them. So to some extent, you can resist their argument. But in case of Ayatollah Khamenei, I think the only thing that he has managed to do is drawing those red lines and saying that, for example, Iran's defense program is, which is the missile program, is non-negotiable. And after those June strikes on Iran, he drew a new line and he said that enrichment won't get zero in Iran. We will not give up our enrichment program because it should be, and it is, and it should be, and it should remain a sort of indigenous industry in Iran. So the point is that if the current government and the nuclear negotiators are able to convince the Americans, and even if you convince them, it is not only Americans, it is not only President Trump, it is Netanyahu, it is the Israeli lobby in the US, in the UK, I mean, in the West, in the entire West, that is producing this narrative that Iran, you can't reach a deal with Iran.
Fereshteh, I just want to turn back to the internal dynamics at play within Iran, because most people in the English-speaking world don't really understand too much about that. I mean, people might have a vague idea that there are different state bodies and different political tendencies, but they aren't very clued up on what that means. People don't seem to know the extent of disagreements between different arms of the state. So let's say, for example, during the JCPOA, which was the Iran nuclear deal negotiations, it became clear that there were tensions between Iran's National Security Council and Iran's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So for those people who are unfamiliar, can you just explain how this tension came about and why it still exists and how we see that playing out now? Because obviously it's Iran's foreign minister who's engaging in indirect talks with the Americans, but the National Security Council appears to have a different view on engaging with them and what that means.
You know, in Iran, they say that it is believed that whatever the decisions are made regarding nuclear talks, regarding the framework of the talks, the decisions that are taken, Iran's dealing with the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Organization, they are all discussed and decided by the the Supreme National Security Council, whose chairman is the president. In that council, Ayatollah Khamenei has two representatives with votes. Certain members of the government are members of this council with some military commanders, and the foreign minister, the minister of intelligence, the minister of interior. So it is believed that this council even now decides about how to discuss things with the United States. And the final decisions made by this council are offered to Ayatollah Khamenei when maybe he gives his nod, maybe he gives his reservations, he put forward his reservations, whatever the case. So, as you said, during the 2015 nuclear deals, what happened? There was a small change. The change was that, I mean, the decision-making process about the nuclear talks was given to the foreign ministry, which was under then Foreign Minister Javad Zarif. And he, alongside President Rouhani, who himself had been the national security advisor in the past, they were making the decisions. It is said that they were in contact with Ayatollah Khamenei's office. But at the end of the day, Javad Zarif, he himself has confessed that the leader had drawn some red lines, and we crossed those red lines because they were in charge of the talks. I think it was with the fall of the nuclear deal in 2018, when President Trump withdrew, and when Europeans stopped cooperating or continuing within this deal with Iran. What we know is that actually it was not ever said publicly, But the nuclear dossier or nuclear case was taken from foreign ministry and especially from Javad Zarif and was returned to the National Security Council, whose secretary back then was Ali Shamkhani. Now that 10 years have passed, they say that Shamkhani was not cooperating with Foreign Minister Javad Zarif and President Rouhani back then. They say that he was sabotaging. So it means that they were among the camp. I don't say principalist camp because they were not principalists, but they say that they were sabotaging the talks, didn't cooperating, didn't, I don't know, they don't go into details, but whatever the case, there were some tensions between them. Right now, according to what I read from between the lines and what we hear from here and there, is that the talks are conducted by Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and his diplomatic team, but the decision-making process and how to deal with it, it is totally under the control of the National Security Council in cooperation and in coordination with Ayatollah Khamenei's office. This means that President Masoud Pezeshkian doesn't have, or his government or the people around him don't have much say in this process. Actually, Pezeshkian, he's a member of the National Security Council and he has a vote. But the point is that the same as it is unlike Rouhani's administrations that in Farsi we say they cut and sew. They made the decision and they implemented it. Now, for that reason, you see that Araghchi very firmly says, missile program is non-negotiable. If it was under Rouhani and Zarif, they would say, okay, willy-nilly, let's see what happens. We may discuss it in the future. But now, Araghchi, because he has been told to say that, no, we don't discuss them, neither missile program, neither Iran's allies in the region, disarming, for example, Hezbollah or Ansarullah, because these are the things that we are here, that Iran should stop supporting these regional groups in Iraq, in Yemen, in Lebanon, and elsewhere. And this is exactly what the regional countries wanted. And that's why they were very eager to attend this round of talks to force Iran to pile up pressure on Iran from all sides. One says, for example, nuclear program, another one says a missile program, the other one says your groups, your friends in the region, your allies. So for now, it seems that there is not much tension as it was during Rouhani and the 2015 deal. There are not much tensions between them, and they are somehow working in coordination with each other. The diplomatic part and the national security and the Ayatollah Khamenei's office, they are all in coordination with each other. So that's why you don't hear many voices, different voices from them. You hear one voice this time around.
Well, it's very interesting what you said there. You must have heard what the US Vice President J.D. Vance was saying very recently. He told Megyn Kelly that diplomacy with Iran is extremely difficult because ultimate authority, he was saying, rests with Ayatollah Khamenei, who won't engage directly with the United States. And he was saying that these lower level officials lack real decision-making power within Iran. I don't think that his assessment was actually all that accurate, but it does beg the question for me, what is the point of having these talks with the US? Iran's foreign minister, Sayyid Abbas Araghchi, is participating in these indirect talks with the US, but as you've just said, there isn't really anything to negotiate. The ballistic missile program is a red line, nuclear enrichment is a red line. Iran is obviously not going to give up its support for the broader axis of resistance in West Asia. So if there's nothing to negotiate, I don't really understand why Araghchi's team is pushing to have these talks in the first place. And if Iran offered any major sort of concession, that would contradict the position of Ayatollah Khamenei and the Supreme National Security Council.
Okay. Let's be fair to Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and his team. To be fair with them, I say they can't move. They can't make any move without the permission from the National Security Council and Ayatollah Khamenei. what J.D. Vance said is that Iran's leader, according to the Iranian constitution, is in charge of the armed forces of the country in foreign policy, but in foreign policy in a big picture, not details, not relations between, for example, X and Y, Iran and X neighbor or Y neighbor. So he's in charge in the bigger issues and bigger pictures in foreign policy and military decisions. So the only person who can allow Iran or who can decide Iran to go into any war or end any war is Ayatollah Khamenei. So Abbas Araghchi is not, he's not walking on his own. And as far as I've seen, he has been trying to remain in that framework. Because, for example, about Foreign Minister Javad Zarif, I don't want to speak against him, but we know that he was a person on his own. He thought that he has his own initiatives that he can implement them, and nobody is smarter than him that to offer these kind of. So he was somehow on his own ahead. He made his own decisions too. But when it comes to Abbas Araghchi, this is not the case. I'm sure about it. So if Iran decided to go to this round of talks, it is due to according to what I think Araghchi himself had said the other day, it was because our regional neighbors insisted a lot. Turkey, Qatar, even Saudi Arabia, they said, okay, just what we say, for the sake of us, let's go for the sake of God to prevent any regional confrontation, to prevent any war, because we know that war has devastating effects, not only on Iranians, this time around, it could be on the entire region. So Iranians say, okay, we are logical people. And the decision to go to these talks was not taken only by the foreign ministry or the government. It was a decision, I can say, by the Nizam or the establishment of the Islamic Republic. So we have to wait and see what comes out of these talks. Maybe nothing comes, maybe it's not very dangerous to talk. And you saw that even this time around, Iranians said, we want to return to Oman. Why they insisted on Oman? Because they wanted to say that we just discuss nuclear matters with you. We are still willing to show that goodwill. We are still willing to make some concessions in return for the lifting of sanctions, nothing more. So when they openly said that nothing else is on the table, it means that they are determined just to discuss it. So what concessions they are ready to make, even they make any concessions, it is a decision that has been taken by the entire political system, not the government alone, not the foreign ministry alone. So we should take into consideration this matter that it is a decision by the Islamic Republic as a whole.
Fereshteh, just moving on a little bit, we've talked about this so-called reformist tendency in Iran. It does seem odd to me that these reformist policymakers in the Islamic Republic who have inclined towards engagement with the United States don't seem to understand two things. First, that integration into the US economy is impossible for Iran, right? They're never going to allow that to happen. And second, that it would be highly undesirable for Iran. If it did actually happen, it would probably spell the end of the Islamic Republic, which I'm sure is what some of these people might actually want. I mean, that's just my personal view, obviously. But just take, for example, Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. It was parceled out among different oligarchs and it opened up to the West. And all Russia got in return was humiliation, poverty, and McDonald's. You know, it didn't open up to the West on Russia's terms, but it opened up on the terms set out by the West itself. And then after that integration into the West failed, and I think it has failed, and you had continuous NATO aggression and expansion, you've seen what's resulted. But aside from these, misguided or treacherous, whatever you want to believe, reformers, it raises a question for me that if these people are calling for, or at least they're supporting Western-style neoliberalism and privatization and asset stripping, then why haven't the real revolutionaries in the Republic developed their own serious theory of Islamic political economy? I mean, where are the revolutionary theorists and intellectuals working within that camp in Iran. And perhaps they do exist and I'm not aware of them because I don't speak Farsi, so I'm limited to what I can access in English. But it does seem to me that there's been real intellectual stagnation among those who strongly support the revolution, especially when it comes to their thinking on political economy.
This is one of the criticisms that many people have made in Iran, especially over the past few years. You can't be a revolutionary country. You can't have revolutionary slogans so long as you are implementing neoliberal and liberal and Western policies, economic policies. You can't be revolutionary so long as you are following the instructions of the World Bank or the IMF. And this is one of the criticisms that has always been, and I can say I can claim in recent years, the voices that are making these criticisms are louder than before. I told you we have two camps officially, reformist camp and principalist camp. And they are not just, you can't say it's a solid camp. They are range of reformist and a spectrum of principalists. But the point about them is that these days, or you can say over the past 2 or 3 years, a third movement or a third camp is trying to appear, which doesn't accept those economic policies that have been implemented in Iran through all these years, through all 4 decades, no matter what government, principalist, reformist, whoever was in power. So I can say it was a short sight of the Iranian officials in early 90s when for the first time Americans imposed sanctions on Iran. We call them primary sanctions. If they were not short-sighted, if they could see the future, they would say that Americans now have started imposing sanctions on me in early 1980s. So it will continue and they would go towards a sort of resistance economy. Actually, you can say Iran is a self-sufficient country. The majority, we are an oil exporter. The majority of products or producers are made in Iran, but there are still some shortcomings vis-a-vis some technologies, or you can say modern technology, modern day technology, because sanctions doesn't just stop your financial routes. They also prevent or block the flow of technology and modern day technology into your country. So they were unfortunately short sighted. And even now that through all these years we have had difficulties, again, in Iran, the finance minister is someone who have studied at the Chicago School of Economy, what they call it, Chicago Boys. And nowadays, I can say what happened to the recent protests in Iran was exactly the same problem, that they started what they call an economic reforms, which cut all subsidies that were given to people. I understand the government. I feel that they were right in doing this or in this performing this economic surgery. But at the same time, they could do it in a more lenient way. They could implement it through you can say a better manner, so it couldn't raise the ire of the people. So this problem still persists. This problem exists, and we know that we have this problem, this contradiction between our revolutionary ideology and the economy, which is neoliberal and which brings with itself neoliberal culture. So you can see that into 2022, we have some problems, or protests over hijab, over the issue of hijab. And it was exactly for the same reason. You can't, as a very famous sociologist in Iran said, you can't implement economic policies and follow World Bank orders, maybe not openly, but behind the scene, and at the same time expect that neoliberal and hegemonic culture doesn't enter your country, because it would.
Well, I think what you were saying there, Fereshteh, is absolutely correct about how neoliberalizing the economy actually neoliberalizes the culture and it creates these other problems as well. I mean, when we think about Westoxification, which people in Iran will be familiar with as Garb Zadegi, there's this fetishization of Western culture. And that happens, I think, as a result of capitalism, which brings about individualism and atomization of society. I mean, when you look at Western countries today, particularly in Europe, people are facing severe economic and cultural decline. And in Britain, and also other European countries, Muslims are talking increasingly about making hijrah, emigrating away from the West. And lots of non-Muslims as well are immigrating. And funnily enough, those people are often traveling to countries in the Arabian Peninsula or even countries like Turkey and Lebanon or Southeast Asia because they're desperate to escape the life here that has become so unaffordable and so atomizing and devoid of community, and dare I even say, devoid of love for your fellow human being. So it's strange to see this phenomenon in Iran where people fetishize the Western economic system when for the vast majority of people in the West, they're facing severe hardship, relatively speaking, obviously. And of course, there is this tiny elite who are ultra rich and live very luxurious lives. But for most people in the West, they're just trying to get by day to day. So it is very puzzling for me to see this phenomenon. Now, Fereshteh, I did have another important topic to discuss with you, which is Iran's policy or former policy of strategic patience. So for those who are unfamiliar, this idea became very prominent after Haj Qasim Soleimani, the leader of the IRGC's Quds Force, was martyred in January 2020. Iran did retaliate against the United States, but it was a very limited and symbolic strike on a couple of US bases in Iraq. The thinking at the time was that Iran would exercise strategic patience. It would wait for the right moment to strike decisively. But then we kept seeing blow after blow after blow against Iran. And the same line kept coming. We're biding our time, let's be patient. And honestly, it became a bit comical and quite concerning. And I think there's now growing recognition that that wasn't the right strategy. And even if some people still believe that it made sense back then, people have now reassessed, especially after the 12-day war last year. And many people are now saying that Iran should move to an explicit war footing. So what's your assessment of this strategic patience doctrine? And do you agree that there's now a need for Iran to adopt a more proactive, aggressive defense doctrine?
The so-called strategic patience, again, was one of the outcomes of you can say, the toxic mindset of the reformists, and especially people like Hassan Rouhani and Javad Zarif. To be honest with you, it had devastating effects on us. And let me tell you something. It didn't start with Iran's weak retaliation following the assassination of General Qasem Soleimani. It started, I think it was in 2015 or maybe late 2014, early 2015. If you remember, there was a siege of Yemen. Saudi Arabia had staged a war, an all-out war on Ansarullah, that they are now in power in Yemen. So it means that siege and that war didn't get to the conclusion that the Saudis wanted. Then back then, I remember that Iran was trying, or maybe the IRGC, whatever we would call it, Iran, as a whole, they tried to break this siege and they sent an aid ship. It was a very big aid ship. And a friend of mine was on board and it was sailing towards Yemen to break the siege. So back then, what happened? Because Iran was in the middle of nuclear talks, it was 2015, with the US. So then Secretary Kerry called Javad Zarif and said, return that ship. Otherwise, talks would collapse. So Zarif, who was in charge, and back then he was very proud of his power, so he asked the establishment or the political establishment to return the ship and said that either reroute it to Djibouti or return it to Iran. And the Iranians didn't want to do so to the dismay of the Yemeni people who were really waiting for this aid ship, they rerouted the vessel to Djibouti. And later, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, that somewhere I read, I can't remember where I read something. I just remember that what I read, that the aid didn't reach even the UN depots. It was ransacked, and it didn't reach the UN depots, let alone the Yemeni people. So it was just waste of time and waste of money for the sake of nuclear talks, which in 2 years, in 3 years, in 2018, they collapsed again. So what we saw was General Soleimani's retaliation. Again, Iranians decided not to be very forceful in their response. Somehow, maybe they were fearful that Trump would retaliate worse. So they decided to limit their strike at Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq. And even back then, they informed the Iraqis and indirectly the Americans that we are striking you with missiles. We are raining down some, I don't know, 10, 11, 15 missiles, not more than that. And they felt that that chapter was closed, but it wasn't. When you remember, the Israelis or Mossad agents or CIA agents, I don't know which, they assassinated Iran's main nuclear scientist, Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. I remember back then Iran didn't do, the reaction was mute. Back then, I remember there was a protest outside the National Security Council when a young boy, a student, he had taken a sign in his hand. And on the sign, it was written that we won't drop our strategic patience, even if, and it was some sort of, you can say, he was mocking the officials. And it was written, even if you assassinate our leaders, we won't leave that strategy of strategic patience. So it was a mocking sign, but it meant a lot. And at the same time, it showed that some people inside the country are against it. So all these things happened, and there were always constant criticisms, because we have, again, inside Iran, we have some, you can say, among principalists, among revolutionaries, among ordinary people who criticize the political system for the decisions that it makes, especially on social media, about foreign policy, about its military policy. So it doesn't mean that Iranians are mute and whatever the Islamic Republic says, everybody says, okay. No, there are voices of criticisms. So after Israel's strikes on Iran, which I don't call it a war because it was not a war, it was an exchange of fire between Iran and the United States, Iranians felt that whatever they have done, it hasn't helped de-escalation, but rather it increased tension and it increased escalation. So you see, 2 weeks ago, when President Trump was just threatening Iran with more military strikes, then Ayatollah Khamenei thrown down the gauntlet, and he said that if you strikes us, then we'll take the war not only to Iran, we won't keep it to Iran, but we will turn it into a regional war. And we were heard about making preparations among Iran's allies in the region. Iran never makes any decision about its allies. It doesn't tell them, join me, but they themselves express support for Iran, express willingness with Iran. Iran never tells Hezbollah, come and fight alongside me, but we saw that Hezbollah Secretary General Sheikh Naim Qasem, he said that if anything happens to Iran, we will stand by Iran. We saw images and videos of Iraqis who were registering for defending Iran. And this is the same thing when it comes to Yemen, which are Iran's friends. So the Americans noticed that it seems that that era of strategic patience has changed, has finished. And now Iranians, they show that they can act more aggressively than before. If in the past they just try to, I can't say appease, but to make the region calm, to help the regional countries not to instigate any war at their doorsteps. This time around, the situation would change dramatically. And it is maybe one of the reasons that President Trump backtracked on his rhetoric and threats on Iran. So for sure, we can say the era of strategic patience has come to its end, and the era of an eye for an eye maybe has started.
Well, I think that the era of an eye for an eye has begun not before time, frankly. I mean, it has been bewildering, even to casual observers, seeing Iran taking blow after blow without retaliating. And strong retaliations are the only way to establish deterrence. If you don't deter the enemy, they'll keep attacking you and they'll keep finding new ways to exploit your weaknesses. And I know that you don't call it a war, but if we look at what's known as the 12-day war last year, it really demonstrated Iran's capabilities. And I believe that the Zionist regime didn't fully reveal just how damaging some of those Iranian missile strikes were to them, or how threatened that they felt as well. I mean, we know that Iran depleted a significant portion of the US THAAD missile inventory, which is the anti-missile system that was provided to defend the Zionist entity. And that was obviously very damaging to the United States' global defense apparatus. So that definitely helped to re-establish some deterrence. And as Ayatollah Khamenei mentioned in a recent statement, any escalation against Iran would now result in a regional war and would be treated as an existential threat against Iran. And I think all of that has made President Trump think more carefully. Fereshteh, just lastly, if the Islamic Republic does manage to avoid an all-out war this year, surely it's time now for revolutionaries in Iran to get to work rejuvenating the revolution. It's now the 47th anniversary of the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Given the experience of the past few years, what priorities do you think revolutionaries should focus on to rejuvenate the Islamic Republic and to make it more resilient, to ensure that the events of the past couple of months can't repeat themselves in a year or two down the line?
What is interesting about Iran, or the fabric of the society of Iran, is that there are still people, and the number is not small number, that they are very, you can say, loyal supporters of the Islamic Republic and the Islamic Revolution. They are still loyal to the causes of the Islamic Revolution, which one of them was the liberation of Palestine. And but they don't have much voice, so you don't hear them a lot. But at the same time, at the times that the Islamic Republic needs help, they come to its help despite all their grievances. So even before these 12 days war, Iran or a confrontation, Iran had two series of strikes against the Israelis on occupied territories. And you won't believe it, but the second one, which was after the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, and then the second one, Iranians, again, that the strategic patient was on the table. And then I remember many of them are students. They held a big gathering outside the National Security Council building. And they say that, why don't you retaliate? So that pressure was very immense, I remember. Maybe the officials didn't expect it from certain people to come outside your National Security Council and say, why don't you strike Israel for the second time? Are you fearful? So that pressure, that public pressure was important. So if the Islamic Republic wants to rejuvenate itself, if it wants to keep people, number one is economy. We have, unfortunately, it's not very good to say, it's not very pleasing to many of your viewers to hear that we have some economic mismanagement. We have some wrong economic policies. As I told you, some of them are exactly following the footsteps of the World Bank and the IMF. Economy and market instability and economic instability fuels unrest. So I can say many Iranians, despite their grievances, still reach to help the Islamic Republic. At the same time, the Islamic Republic should work more on what we can say to win hearts and minds of its own people, especially when it comes to the resistance, access of resistance, to reveal the double standards and the animosity of the West on human rights. These days on social media is filled with the Epstein files. And Epstein, I'm sure that it was not a single case in the Western culture. It is something rampant. I don't want to offend anybody, but among people who just think about power and getting the world into their hands, it's not something strange to see all these, atrocities and this, how disgusting they were. So the Islamic Republic should show its people that, look, the grass is not greener on the other side of the fence. This is the West, pure, simple, and it is the naked West that some of you, you like it. You would like to join it, to join that Western world for nothing, for losing all your, you can say, spiritual values, your religion, which is Islam, which is a liberating religion. So, to some extent, so for again, back to your question, number one, economy, because economy and the economic instability fuels unrest, fuels dissatisfaction. Number two is cultural, maybe cultural programs to convince people culturally that, look, you are Iranians, you've been in this region for at least 25, you can say, decades, you have culture, you have civilization, you have good relationship with other countries around yourself, with Pakistan, with Afghanistan, in Central Asia, you have people who speak the same language with you. You have very cultural and religious, strong cultural and religious bonds with people in Iraq, even in Saudi Arabia, and then Sunnis, especially Sunnis that we can say fair Sunnis, who are not takfiris. They are our friends, they are our beloved friends, and we should appreciate their support for Iran, and we should keep these cultural bonds even stronger. So, the Islamic Republic, as you know, in the Western countries, many people now they feel that the Islamic Republic, through all these years, has been, with all its mistakes, with all its shortcomings, with all its wrong strategies, still it was standing, and it has been standing on its own feet, and fighting with the global, we can say, monster. It has been like a David that has been fighting with the Goliath in the West, which is the entire Western Hemisphere. So I think we have to encourage our people, Iranians, to see these facts, because many of the Iranians, unfortunately, these days, with this social media, with this, that they portray a glorious picture of Iran before the revolution. There are two or three Iranian, London-based, American-based TV. One of them is the BBC Persian, another one is called Manoto, and the other one is Iran International. And they are constantly pumping dissatisfaction, humiliation, being a strangeness to your own identity, by showing that, oh, before the revolution, everything was great. If everything was glorious before the Islamic Republic, why people revolted against the Shah? And everything was fine. We have a relationship with the Americans. We were called the gendarme of the region. So why people revolted against it? So it means that no, everything was not fine. The situation in the Islamic Republic is far way better. I didn't live in Shah era, but my parents lived, and they speak about the cultural decay in the last year of the Shah's reign. So you see, Iranians, unfortunately, this pumpage of this constant pumpage and pumping of dissatisfaction, strangeness to their own culture, they have made some Iranians, unfortunately, like zombies. They don't understand anything. And I think the Islamic Republic, or people in charge of cultural matters, should really think about it, maybe, I don't know, even setting up some tours to other countries, to see other countries, to see their culture. I know there are very good things about the UK, but at the same time, there are things that is forcing some Muslim and non-Muslim British citizens to leave the country. If there is some problem, it means that it's not great as you are told, as you are always portrayed as it is. So I hope the Islamic Republic has this ability. I think people still believe in the Islamic Republic and its causes. We have, it is not a proverb, it is some sort of expression among people. Sometimes people say that, I mean, inside the country, they say that with these officials that we have, some of them are with this vestification, they are westernized. It seems that the only one who is keeping this Islamic Republic and this country intact are the people. If it was to these officials, the Islamic Republic had collapsed several times in the past. But it was the people of Iran, the really loyal, I can say noble people of Iran, the real Muslims, and the faithful to the causes of Islam and the Islamic Revolution that they have kept up until now through all these 4 decades, almost 5 decades of animosity, war, strikes, sabotage, assassinations, this pumpage, a constant pumpage of Western propaganda against Iran, with all this pressure and economic pressure in recent years, which we know, by the way, that it has Western roots. It is coming from the United States. As a secretary, I think it was the Treasury Secretary the other day, said that we are working and we are changing the exchange rate between Iranian rial and the US dollar, and we are injecting this devaluation of the Iranian rial. We are helping it. That again, it adds to public dissatisfaction. Through all these years, again, it was the noble people of Iran who have kept the Islamic Republic intact, and I hope that they will keep it intact, and they will defend it to the time that the victory will be ours, not theirs.
Well, thank you very much for that, Fereshteh. I just want to pick up on one thing first, which is that you began by saying that your comments might be displeasing to some of our viewers. But actually, I think that the time for this sort of critical support for the Islamic Republic is long overdue and very important. I mean, I know that particularly in wartime, people don't want to be too openly critical, but we can't keep having a situation where every few years there's a new attempt to destabilize the Republic, no lessons are learned, and the internal situation just continues to stagnate and get worse. I mean, we know full well that there's been economic mismanagement and corruption. There are oligarchs profiting from sanctions avoidance mechanisms, often routed through places like Dubai. And this demoralizes people. It's entirely understandable that those people who are loyal and faithful to Islam and to the revolution would be deeply upset by all of this, especially when their own living standards have been affected. I mean, just look at how other countries handle this. You take China, for example. China deals very swiftly and quite brutally with corrupt officials. Those people don't last very long in the Chinese system. Yet in Iran, somehow, they seem to just carry on without consequence, and that has to be dealt with. And I will say sanctions are 100% the major problem here. But corruption and mismanagement do make things much, much worse, and it demoralizes people, and that's the key thing there. Another major issue is that you have these so-called reformers operating openly, and I think that many of these people are just plain out-and-out counter-revolutionaries. They're not reformists. And they are continuing to try to turn to the US and to try to integrate into the Western financial system. And they're pursuing economic policies that materially damage people's living standards. If Iran instead turned decisively towards the East and to more reliable economic partners, and it worked to extricate itself fully from the Western financial system, I think that would produce a lot of benefits. You also mentioned information warfare, and I completely agree that that is vital. I mean, the Iranian propaganda effort has been lacking. As you mentioned, there is, against the Islamic Republic, platforms like Iran International, Manuto, and these are new forms of media funded and backed by Western intelligence agencies that have major financial resources put into them, and they're often run by younger, media-savvy people. And they aren't just relying on traditional broadcast programs. They're using TikTok, Instagram, and other platforms like that. I mean, if you scroll through, Western social media outlets, you would think that 99% of Iranians support the return of the Shah, which obviously isn't true. There's a minority that does support it, but they aren't the majority. So Iran has to up its game in information warfare. And it's not just about messaging inside Iran. There's a large Iranian diaspora, millions of Iranians living abroad in Western countries. If those communities are radicalized by platforms like Iran International and Manuto, and they start lobbying governments in the United States, Canada, Britain, Germany, and other European countries, you end up with things like the IRGC being added to terrorism lists. And then you have lobbies advocating for bombing the Islamic Republic. So information warfare, I think, is something that Iran absolutely has to build up and has to, improve on. And I hope that if anyone in the Islamic Republic is listening to this conversation, that they'll take that critical support on board, because blind deference is not going to help. We have to do the real work to ensure that the Islamic Republic can prosper for decades to come and to truly serve the Iranian people. But with that, unfortunately, we have to bring it to an end there. Fereshteh, I really appreciate your time and you sharing your insights with us. And I'd encourage everyone to follow your work. I know that you are on X. Are you on any other platforms that people can follow you, or is that the best place to find you?
I think the best place to follow me is on X, and from time to time, I make some contributions to the Cradle, the London-based pro-resistant news site. So I hope that this conversation had been useful to your viewers. And there is an Iranian story. There is a Persian story. Very quickly, I tell you, somebody dreamt of Satan, and all the time Satan is in cartoons and in media is portrayed as a as a devil with horns, and then he saw that Satan is very beautiful, like an angel. And it said that, oh, you look very gorgeous, you look beautiful, you look very spiritual, but we always heard that you are like a devil with horns. And he said, unfortunately, the pen is in enemy's hands. So this is the same thing that comes to Iran, the Islamic Republic. We have much enemies, and the social media, unfortunately, we have many enemies. And the social media, unfortunately, is under their control. And they have loud voices, but believe me, their numbers are not very big.
Yeah, we know about the saying about wolves in sheep's clothing. The wolf is not going to come to you baring its teeth. It's going to come to you dressed as something innocent. But with that, Fereshteh, we're going to have to call it to an end there. I thank you again for appearing on the show, and thank you very much to all of our listeners and viewers. If you enjoyed this content, please make sure to like this video and to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Help us to overcome the algorithmic limitations that we're facing, and we'll see you on the next one.